The day before my wedding, my mother came into my room and sat on the edge of my bed. It was the same bed I had slept in since I was 4, the same quilt my grandmother had pieced together from scraps of our old dresses, faded now, but still warm. She folded her hands in her lap the way she always did before saying something she considered important. I was 18. In 14 hours, I would be a wife. She looked at me for a long moment, longer than usual, and I remember thinking she might cry, though my mother never cried, not once in my whole childhood. Instead, she said, "Be a good helper to him. Submit as the church teaches. God will bless your obedience." Then she stood, smoothed her apron, and walked out of the room. That was it. That was everything I was given before the most frightening night of my life. My name is Martha. I grew up Old Order Amish in Indiana, and this channel, Hannah the Amish Girl, is where I say the things my community would never have allowed me to say out loud. If stories like this one matter to you, subscribe, tap the like button, and tell me in the comments, did anyone ever send you into something enormous with absolutely no idea how to face it? I read every comment, everyone. Now let me tell you what that conversation with my mother actually contained, because it took years, and a therapist and a vocabulary I was never given to understand it for what it really was. It was not preparation. It was instruction for endurance. There is a difference, and that difference cost me more than I can explain in a single video. In Old Order communities, the days before a wedding disappear into work. Cooking begins 3 days out. In my district, a wedding meant feeding 200 or 300 people. My aunts arrived Tuesday. There were chickens to dress, pies to roll, benches borrowed from the church wagon, tablecloths borrowed from half the township. My dress had hung finished behind the bedroom door for 2 weeks in a cotton bag, a deep burgundy, because we did not wear white. In all those days of cooking and cleaning and pressing and arranging, not 1 hour was set aside to prepare me for what would happen when our bedroom door finally closed that first night. Not 1 hour. Not one sentence beyond what my mother gave me on the edge of that bed. Be a good helper. Submit. God will bless your obedience. I need you to understand the belief underneath those words, because it matters. In my community, a wife's body was not spoken of as something with its own experience. It was spoken of as a function. It existed to serve, to bear children. The idea that it might also need something, information, acknowledgement, even just a warning that this might be frightening, never entered the conversation, because to raise that idea would have meant admitting a woman's experience was worth considering on its own terms. And in my district, it simply was not. The Ordnung, the unwritten code that governed every hour of our lives, said nothing about intimacy. It didn't need to. There was no rule forbidding brides from being told what to expect. The silence was so total, so unanimous, that it functioned exactly like law. No one spoke, no one ever had, so no one did. I learned how strange that silence had been only in a small office years later, sitting across from a therapist who kept asking me to go back and describe what I had known walking into that night. Each time I answered, which was almost nothing, she wrote something down, her face carefully neutral. And from that neutrality, I understood, slowly, that what I was describing was not normal anywhere else in the world, just in mine. Here is what I knew. I knew marriage involved something physical between husband and wife, because the Ordnung existed around it, because courtship had rules that implied something needed protecting. I knew the purpose of that physical thing was children, because children were what God sent a faithful marriage, and children were what you spent the rest of your life raising. Here is what I did not know. I did not know what my own body would do. I did not know fear could make everything worse. I did not know there was an entire range of experience between nothing, which is what I'd been told, and everything, which is what I was about to live through. I did not know my husband, 22, and raised inside the same silence as me, would be nearly as lost as I was. I did not know two people could stand at the edge of something enormous with nothing at all to hold on to. His name was Joseph. He was a good man. He still is, and I want to say that clearly, the way I've had to say it clearly in therapy, because it would be easy in a story like this one to let the man become the shape of everything that went wrong. He wasn't. Joseph was 22 years old, handed the exact same silence I had been handed, and doing his best inside it. So was I. That, I think, is the most heartbreaking part of the whole thing. We were both trying. We simply had nothing to try with. What I remember from that first night isn't tenderness. It isn't the romance people imagine when they picture a young bride. I remember the lamp on the dresser. I remember my hands shaking so badly I could barely unpin my hair. I remember not knowing what came first, or second, or at all, and being so exhausted from 17 hours of cooking and smiling and receiving the blessings of 300 people that I could hardly stand upright. And beneath that exhaustion was something colder, something I couldn't name at 18 but can name now. Dread. Not dread of Joseph. Dread of the unknown. Dread of a thing I had no map for at all. I wish I could go back and sit beside that girl with the shaking hands and tell her what was coming. Even just the outline. Even just, this is what your body might do. This is normal. This isn't. Even clumsy words. Even a halting, imperfect conversation that left out half of what it should have said. I would have taken any of it. I would have taken one single sentence that acknowledged I was a person with a body about to have an experience, and that the experience was allowed to matter. My friend Rebecca married a year before me at 17. I didn't learn until 4 years later that she had spent the first months of her marriage in a confusion so complete it had started to feel like illness. She thought something was wrong with her. She thought her struggle meant she lacked faith. She told me this in her kitchen in a whisper, while her youngest slept in the next room. By then, I had learned enough to tell her the truth. There was nothing wrong with her faith. There was something wrong with the silence she'd been handed. There's a part of this story the platform won't let me say out loud. I've learned exactly where those limits sit, so I wrote the rest down instead, slowly, without the softening, without anything cut out. The book is called The Ordnung They Never Wrote Down, 208 pages of what plain life actually looks like from the inside. The link is in the first comment if you want the part I can't say here. Let me tell you about the morning after. I woke before dawn, the way I had every morning of my life. The house was silent. Joseph was still asleep. I lay there in the gray light, in this bed that was now mine, in this house that was now mine, in this life that was now irreversibly mine, and waited to feel what I'd been promised: wholeness, completion. The peace that's supposed to come from walking in obedience. What I felt instead was alone, and confused, and quietly ashamed, not because anything had been done wrong, but because no one had ever told me what right was supposed to feel like. I had no baseline to measure the night against, nothing except the bishop's sermons about yielding and the memory of my mother's folded hands. Neither of those things had prepared me for what a body actually feels. I got up. I dressed. I lit the stove. I fed the animals. I moved through the morning in silence, because silence was the only language I had been given. I told myself, this is what faithfulness looks like. This is the beginning of the life God intended. I believed that for longer than I should have. The women in my community weren't cruel, and I want to say that too because it's also true. My mother didn't withhold what she withheld because she wanted me to suffer. She withheld it because it had been withheld from her, and from her mother before that. The silence passed down through the women in my family, the way quilt patterns are passed down, stitch by stitch, generation after generation, without anyone stopping to ask whether the pattern still served the woman wearing it. There was an older woman in our district, a neighbor older than my mother, known for saying things sideways at quilting bees. She'd drop a sentence about patience, about what a body learns over time, and the married women would catch each other's eyes for half a second. a flicker of recognition. I wasn't married yet. I didn't understand it then. I understood later, but I was never one of the ones she pulled aside before a wedding. I still don't know why. That's the part that haunts me most. It wasn't character or faith or worthiness. It was proximity. It was timing. It was whether the right woman happened to look at you at the right moment and decide you were someone worth risking the silence for. I wasn't her, so I learned alone, slowly, over months that didn't need to be as hard as they were. Over mornings I rose from in quiet pain I'd been taught to call holiness. Over conversations with Joseph that didn't happen for a long time because I didn't have words for them. And then, once I found the words, had to build the courage to use them. That conversation, when it finally came, was one of the hardest things I've ever done. We were at the kitchen table one evening, the lamp between us, and I told him I had been struggling, that I hadn't known what to expect, that there were things I needed and hadn't known how to ask for. He went quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "Because I didn't know I was allowed to." Something moved across his face, not anger, something closer to grief. "I didn't know either," he said. "I didn't know what you needed because no one ever told me what to ask." We sat there a long while, the horses shifting in the barn, the clock ticking on the wall, two people in their 20s, married over a year, finally beginning, very slowly, to speak to each other about the thing that had lived in our house every single day and never once been named out loud. That conversation happened because of us, not because of anything the community ever gave us. We had to build it from scraps of courage left over after a lifetime of learning that asking was dangerous and silence was holy. After I left, the leaving was its own story. The shunning, the letters returned, my mother's voice on the phone going quiet in a way I will never stop hearing in my sleep. I found a therapist who specialized in women from closed communities. She asked me once, "If you could change one thing about your preparation for marriage, what would it be?" I didn't hesitate. I said I would want someone to tell me the truth, not to soften it, not to dress it up in scripture until it became about obedience instead of about me. Just the truth. What's coming? What's normal? What help looks like? What I'm allowed to want? She wrote that down, then looked up and said, "Do you know what's interesting? You didn't say you wanted it to be easier. You wanted it to be true." I've thought about that nearly every day since. I called this video, "I Wish Someone Had Lied to Me," and I owe you the honesty of what I actually mean by that. I don't wish anyone had lied. I wish the truth had come to me in a gentler shape. I wish someone had sat on the edge of my bed the night before my wedding and said, "This will be hard, and that's allowed. Your fear isn't faithlessness. Your body isn't something to be gotten through. You're allowed not to know. You're allowed to ask. You're allowed to need things. That isn't a lie." It's also not what my mother told me. Be a good helper. Submit. God will bless your obedience. Those words were true in the world she lived in. They just weren't the whole truth, and the part left out is the part that cost me years. If you grew up somewhere your body was handed to a life before you understood what your body even was, I see you. If you were given obedience instead of information and told they were the same thing, you are not alone. If you woke up on a morning you'd been promised would feel like a blessing, and it felt instead like a question with no language to ask it in, I believe you. The question was real. The words just hadn't reached you yet. You were always allowed to need more than silence.